If you do not want spoilers for Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, turn off this video because they are going to be spoilers. This might not make any sense. I typically don't read a lot of sci-fi, and if I do read it, it's usually combined with some other genre. So I like the Lunar Chronicles that has sci-fi elements, but it's more YA fairy tale retelling. I like Patrick Ness's books, the Chaos Walking series. That's a little bit more on the dystopian side. Actually, that might not be accurate at all. It might be straight sci-fi. All that to say, I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I've been hearing about this book on BookTube, and so I decided, why not give it a try if I don't like it? I don't have to finish it. I really did like it, though. Not enough to, read sci-fi all the time, but I would read another Blake Crouch book, so I'm hoping to read Recursion at some point. Basically, if you don't know what this book is about, it's about a guy named Jason, and he was on the track to become a scientist, or he was a scientist, but he was about to make some really big scientific advancements. And then he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant, and so he decided to marry her instead, and he became a professor. And so when this book starts, he's teaching science, and he's living life with his wife and his son, and he's pretty happy with it. Every now and then he wonders what life would have been like, if he'd gotten to live out his dreams of making those scientific discoveries, but for the most part, he's happy where he is. And then one night he gets kidnapped, and he wakes up in a world where he did make those scientific advancements, but that means that he's not married to his wife and his son never existed. And so he's obviously very confused and very lost, and he's trying to figure out how to get back to his family. It's kind of crazy. It deals a lot with the multiverse and quantum something or other that I'm not going to try to explain because I honestly couldn't understand it. This book is a little too sciencey smart for me. Not to the point where I didn't want to read it, but I was trying to understand it, and I realized I'm just not going to understand how this works. Ultimately, he realizes that Jason, not the main character, but the version of him in the reality he traveled to, was able to figure out how to jump from one part of the multiverse to another, from one world to another. And so, oh man, my brain is hurting just talking about this. We'll say that this book is from the POV of the main Jason, just because that's the one you're inside the head of. They call the Jason who figured out the multiverse, they call him Jason 1, so I'll just call him that for the sake of this. Main Jason finds out that Jason 1, who made all the scientific advancements, he went to main Jason's world, and he was the one that kidnapped him, because he made all these advancements, but then he realized, I could have had a family and I could have been happy doing that. He wasn't feeling fulfilled with his work, and he thought, maybe if I go to this reality where I did have a family and I was happy. Main Jason, the one whose head we're inside of, main Jason realizes that the guy that kidnapped him was another version of himself. It was the version of him that made these scientific advancements and discovered how quantum something or other, how you can travel from one world to another, from one dimension to another. So he was kidnapped by the version of himself that made those discoveries, because Jason 1, the version of him that made those discoveries, wasn't happy and wasn't fulfilled in his life, and he thought, if I go to this other reality where there's a version of me that's happy, I can replace him and then I can finally be happy. So that's why he got kidnapped, was because this other version of himself wanted to live his life, if that makes sense. And so basically, main Jason is trying to get back to his world, and he's really worried now because he's realizing there's this other version of him that's living with his wife and his son, and he knows he can't trust this guy, so he wants to get back to his family, not only because he misses them, but because he's worried for their safety. And so there's this girl who works at the lab where they have the quantum, I forgot what it's called. It's like a box, and there's a box, and they walk inside, and then they travel through that. But there's this girl who is working on it, and she's like the psychologist at the lab, and she decides she wants to go with Jason and help him find his family, because she just needs to escape from the lab that she's working at because it's terrible. And so they end up going separate ways after a while, but there's a good part of the book where they're just jumping from one world to the next, trying to find his family. And there's always something that's off. Either they go to a world where, there's one where there was a pandemic and he watched his wife die. There was one world where things were almost perfect, but then some of the businesses in his town weren't the same, and so he knew it wasn't his world. Eventually, there's a point where he is able to make it back to his real world, just him. He had to say goodbye to that other girl. But Jason makes it back to his world, and so then he finally is able to meet with his wife in secret, and he explains to her that there's another version of him that had been living with her for the past month, and he's only able to convince her of that because he tells her to call his phone, and so she hears his voice on the phone call. She hears the other version of him while main Jason is standing in front of her. And then it gets really crazy at the end because Jason's family finds out that he's the right one, but then there's all these other versions of Jason that are also trying to make it home. Because essentially, whenever a character has to make a decision, there's other worlds where the other outcomes of those decisions happen. A lot of it felt very similar to Marvel, where they have the TVA and they explain there's the timeline, but then there's different branches based off of what different things happen. Like the example of where there's a Jason who became a really big scientist, and there's one who started a family. But then there's a lot of simpler things too. Like every time that Jason tried to explore a world in the multiverse, there was a version of him that explored a different part of the multiverse. So every decision he made while he was trying to find his wife meant that there was another split in the timeline, if that makes sense. There was another version of him that did something different. And so there are multiple versions of him that make it back to main Jason's world. And all of them experience what he did up to different points. So they've experienced a lot of the traumas he did while he was trying to find his wife, which is really hard to think about because you see the Jason you're reading about find his wife, but then it's making you think, okay, but there's other versions of him that didn't. It's easy to disconnect yourself from Jason 1. He's seen as the villain. There's these other ones that split off more recently. They might have experienced the same thing that main Jason did up until maybe a day before he met his wife or something. It's almost as if there's versions of him that experienced everything in the book, but with an unhappy ending, which is sad to think about. And so there's a point where he and his wife and his son are running away because all these other versions of Jason are coming because they want to be reunited with their family, his family. And so he's trying to figure out, if there's so many different versions of him, none of them are the real Jason. It's real to him, but all of these Jasons are technically from his world. They're just versions of him that made different decisions, but all found a way back to the same world. And so he's trying to figure out, what right do I have to be with my family any more than these people do? And thankfully, ultimately, he does end up getting to stay with his family, which kind of makes you think, well, why did he want him to be with his family more than the other people? He's able to convince them all that he's the one that should stay because it's what his wife wants. And all of them want to make his wife happy because she's not their wife too. That's a weird way to put it, but they're all still Jason, and Jason is married to Daniela. And so they all love her, but they want her to be happy, and they want the son to be safe. I don't believe that there is a multiverse. I think it's interesting to watch movies and stuff that talk about that kind of thing, but I don't believe in any of that. And this book made me very encouraged. Especially as a Christian, it just made me grateful that the things in life matter a lot more, because there's not, another world where maybe that didn't happen, or there's multiple versions of you, so what makes this version of you any special? So I think it was interesting to read that, knowing that I don't believe that theory. It's interesting to read about that kind of scientific theory, because even though I don't believe in it, it made me encouraged, because I believe there is just so much value in each individual person, and you are the only version of yourself. There's not another world where you ate something different for lunch, and so then there's a version of you that branched off from that or whatever. Just makes you feel kind of less lost and small, to know if I did believe this, then it would feel a lot more like nothing has any meaning. And I'm a very strong believer that there isn't anything that doesn't have some meaning. So kind of encouraging, I guess, to read from that perspective. It made me think a lot, but I also feel like I haven't thought about it enough. I don't know if there's going to be another part to this video. I don't really think I could say anything more about it, so I'm probably just going to leave this as it is. And if you made it to the end of this, bless you. That ended up being harder to explain than I thought it would be. I almost think I needed a whiteboard to draw things out. But basically, if you got to the end of this and you haven't read this book and you still want to after I spoiled it for you, I would say pick it up because it was a fun one. And it's a good thriller too. Like, I'm picky with my thrillers, so it has you on the edge of your seat, but it's not like scarring or anything like that to me. So I would recommend this book, and if you read it, let me know what your thoughts are on it. No, that sounded really messed up. Maybe it is a little messed up, but that didn't come out quite right. I thought I was more ready to film this video than I actually am. I don't think I can explain this very well. Goodness gracious. Maybe if I take that guy's life, then... No, that's not right. This is going to be fun for me to edit later. Jason 1, who made the scientific I just need to yap about this.